Hey guys! Alright, today we're going to be looking at pop art, some of its defining features, and then we're going to also look at what our project is going to be about. So when we see pop art, one of the specific types of pop art that we think about is the comic book style, also made popular by the artist Roy Lichtenstein. But one of the things we notice about comic book style is we have bold black lines, we have what are called Ben-Day dots. Those are dots that are used to make areas of color. And then we also tend to have words. Ben-Day dots, essentially what they do is they allow printers to only use a limited number of colors, but by printing dots either close together, far apart, or on top of each other, it allows them to have more colors that you can see and experience without having to have 500 different colors of ink. This is one of Roy Lichtenstein's prints. It gives you a really good example of using those Ben-Day dots. So even though these are red dots, and this is the same red ink, because the dots space it out a little bit, it feels lighter than this particular ink. Same with the blue. We get the dark version where it's all clumped together, and the lighter version where those Ben-Day dots are separating it out. You'll also notice that he tends to use very primary colors, so red, yellow, and blue, and that the lines are very bold and defined. Sometimes you'll see the lines getting thicker to add emphasis or movement, and other times those lines are nice and thin. What we don't see, though, is a very loose, sketched or scratched line. You see very distinct lines. Now, another big part of that style, that comic book influence, is what we call onomatopoeia. So onomatopoeia is a word that is a sound. For example, thwack or bam or crash. Those words that are also the sound that's made by a certain action. So, for example, you see the sound that's made by Wolverine letting his claws out, or by Wolverine ripping his claws across something. Spider-Man is a total pro at this. Thwack! Boop! So having those helps bring your viewer or your reader into what's happening. It's a more immersive experience because that onomatopoeia lets them feel like they're in the scene. So what we're going to do today is we are going to start a project with our own onomatopoeia. So you're going to get to choose a word, and then we're going to make it into a giant comic book onomatopoeia. So here's some examples. Boom, zoom, splat, slurp, boing, kaboom, roar, chomp, ooze. We have a whole list for you to help you out. You're welcome to choose a word from the list, or if you can think of a word that is onomatopoeia, remember it's not a word that is like paper, because paper is not telling us the sound that paper makes when it rips. Rip or scorch. Those would both be onomatopoeia for that same thing. If you can think of a word that's onomatopoeia that's not on this list, you can run it by your teacher and see if that works. If it does, great. If not, then we'll go back to another. And then later on, you and I are going to use those bubbles, bangs, booms, bursts to help show our action as well. So let's see what it looks like as we start to use our skills for onomatopoeia. So let's say I picked a word. Let's say I picked whoosh. Normally, there we go. Normally, if I'm just writing whoosh, I'd write it in my regular handwriting. But we noticed as we looked at those comic book words, they have bubble letters because they're giving the words emphasis. We're going to practice writing bubble letters today. So when I write a bubble letter, the first thing I need to do is write that individual letter lightly, just like I would if I was writing a normal letter. And then I'm going to go and make an outline around the letter. Essentially, I'm putting up a fence around the letter. So I'm coming and I'm making a wide margin around it. So that later when I go back and I erase, usually I like to erase after I've Sharpied, instead of having just a simple letter, I have a bubble letter. All right, let's try that with the O. The O is a little bit different because it is a closed letter. So if I'd made my O, I'm going to make that first fence around it on the outside. But then I need to make my second fence around the inside. Now once I've done that, I'm going to come in and I am going to erase right there. And there we go, I have a bubble letter. Let's try with a little letter that's tricky. Let's say you were using a lowercase e. Okay, then when I go, I'm making my first gate all the way around, putting up that fence and that gate around it. Now, I do have an inside shape, so I need to come and get that as well. Now, when we do our letters in the final part in just a minute, you'll see sometimes it's just as easy to come and Sharpie that first, and then worry about erasing. That way, you don't accidentally erase something you'd need. Some people find it easier to erase first. If that's you, that's totally fine. But do you see how simple that was for us to make a bubble letter? Not a problem. All right. So what you're going to do is once you've picked your word, you're going to be getting individual squares of paper to spell your word. I have whoosh, so I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I need all of my letters to be about the same size as the square. I do not want to have my letter only take up this little bitty bit down here. So if I come and make my W, I want it to take up most of that paper. Now, should I write super dark? Nope, because that way it's going to be harder for me to do what? That's right, erase. So I'm going to go around adding that fence like we just talked about. And I'll repeat the process for each one of my letters. Now let's say in my mind I wanted my whoosh to have a little bit of emphasis. Maybe I want it to look like things are sweeping off the back. Then before I Sharpie, I'm going to come and do that with certain places on my W so that I know there I have the emphasis of like it's moving. Okay? When I finish, I'm going to carefully come and Sharpie so that I'm going all the way around. And you may have a word that you don't really feel like you need any emphasis. That's totally fine. But if you feel like you do, you can add that, or if you think it would make your piece even stronger. All right, I've got this right now. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to erase my pencil, both the pencil with that original letter that I went around and any pencil that wasn't covered up by my Sharpie. That way, my little trick I use to make block letters is just that. It's my trick. It's a secret. Now the other thing that you can do to help yourself out is you can go in and add some shadows. Now a shadow just has to depend on whether it came from the left or the right. So if your light was coming from the right, then the shadows would be on the left. If your light was coming from the left, your shadows would come on the right. I'm going to pretend my light is coming from right here. Woohoo! So it's going to be on the left. On the